Okay, so we are up to Daf Samach Umar Aleph. Oops, I missed the wrong Daf. And I believe that we are up to the two dots. Nazan Shemin Ashira, good morning, Shmuel. Nazan Shemin Ashira. I told Oilam that everybody else, since they changed the clock, has to get up an hour earlier. The Vesikim cannot get up an hour later. Zok Gemara Taner Rabbanim, Lo Yosim Oleh Shemin Velo Yiting. Yochel b'shnei kohanim. You might think it's speaking about two kohanim. Now Rashi learns a pshat that's very difficult to understand. Rashi says, I would think the lo yischayvu shnei lavin ad sheyehu shnei kohanim echad noisen shemen ve'echad noisen levina. I would have thought that it says in the pasuk lo yosem Allah shemen, lav number 1, v'lo yitein oleh levina is lav number 2. I would have thought you could only be over both two lavin if there are two kohanim doing this. Is there one is doing the shemen and one is doing the levina? Of course, Tosfos ask, why would I think that? Every other lav in the Torah applies to everybody. Why would I say that this lav in particular only refers to two kohanim? So Tosfos has a different shot, which we'll get to, but let's finish off the Gemara first. Talmud Loimar Oleha. We're focusing only on the mincha itself. We're not talking about the kohen. So therefore, even if one person does it, you might think that you're not allowed to put oil into the minchas chayte, which shouldn't have oil in it. But what if I put oil on it, but the oil was in the container? So I have a big bowl with the mincha in it, then I take a small container of oil and put it inside the container on top of the mincha. You might think that would be a problem. The isser to put oil into the mincha is only pouring it into the actual flour, not just in the container separated from the flour. So we have this problem with Rashi. What does it mean? Why would I have a havamina that you need two kohanim? That's unheard of. But there's another question we need to ask as well. Lo yosim oleh shemen, v'lo yitna lo levayna. So if it's talking about one person, so the kohen has his mincha here, he pours shemen into it, then he pours levayna into it. Let's stop for a minute. The moment he poured shemen into the mincha, now this mincha is puzzle. Is there an isser to pour levayna into a mincha that's puzzle? So let's see what Tosfos says. Yochel b'shnei kohanim Talmud Loimer Aleha. So Alman Tosfos on the third wide line. Pirish b'kuntrish shelo yischayvu b'shnei lavin al halavoina ve'al hashemen. Ela shnei kohanim where echad is noisen es hashemen ve'echad noisen es halavoina. Aval chad kohen, but one kohen doing both of these actions loy michayiv elachad. Elachad lav. Frek Tosfos the kosher. It doesn't make any sense. Kiva nechsivi shnei lavin lama lo yischayiv kohen echad k'moi shnayim. What's the difference if it's one kohen doing it or with both kohanim? If it's two kohanim, at the end of the day, there's two separate lavin. So Tosfos has two pshatim. V'nir lefarish the mayri b'shtei menachos hanasos b'shnei kohanim. We're speaking about two separate menachos. In one mincha, shemen was put in, the other levana was put in. Why is there an assumption that two menachos would be processed by two different kohanim? Why can't they have one kohen process both menachos? That's the way it always was. Mishum b'roiv am hadris melech. When there's two karbanos, we never have one kohen take care of both. We don't want to kill two birds with one stone in the base of Mikdash. It's exactly the opposite. We want the right of Hadris Melech. So the havamina is it should be. We must be speaking about two menachos. Why? Because in the same mincha, once you pour in the oil, the mincha is puzzle. So therefore, there must be two separate menachos we're talking about. So therefore, yeah, it could be one kohen pouring shemen into one mincha and levoid into the other. But the norm is if there's two menachos, there's going to be two kohanim. The betznufas chazav v'shoik v'chalavim Again, you find that there's a maximum amount of kohanim that are designated to each avodah. Why? Mishum b'roiv ham hadras melech. So therefore, kol shekain b'shtei menachos. V'hachik amar. So now, Zoktoises, we can understand what the Gemara Shaila was. Yochol b'shtei menachos dafka ksivi shnei lavin. You might think that when the Torah said L'yasem el Shemen, V'litna la'levaina, it's not speaking about the same mincha. We're speaking about two different menachos. Shebezois nasan shemen, uvezois nasan levaina. Why would I think that we're speaking about two separate menachos? Simple. The ilu b'mincha achas kivin dekvar nasan Allah shemen harahi psula. Once you put shemen on, it's possible. Why would you be mechuyev for putting levaina on a pasal of mincha? V'loy mechayev su al levaina. You shouldn't be chayev anymore for the levaina. Like we find by mechametz as a psula the potter. We said once the mincha is yotzei from the confines of the azara, and it becomes possible. Now there's no more isser of mechametz. V'yavel gav dehasam ksiv lashem didarshinon ksheira v'loy psula. Even though we have a special limud in the halacha of being machmitz a mincha that tells us that there's only an isser to do this on a mincha ksheira and not a mincha psula. And over here, maybe it's even also to put levaina into a mincha psula. Maybe we learn from that halacha that just like the halacha of mechametz doesn't apply to a mincha that's already possible, so too putting levaina, the issue of putting levaina into a mincha does not apply to a mincha psula. Talmud loymar, so that's the Gemara's havmina. The havmina is that you cannot be over both lavin one after the other, because once there's oil in this mincha, you'll no longer be over for putting levaina on it. Talmud loymar aleha begufa shal mincha akasif medaber achidish neira l'chayiv shnei lavin. Even if you're putting your levaina into a mincha psula, because the mincha already has oil in it, it's still going to be a second lav. Faktoises uksas kasha. The ema dekra mairi, maybe the pasuk is speaking b'shenosan hashemen v'esalavayna b'vazachas. Why can't it be speaking where you didn't put levaina into a mincha psula? You put it in simultaneously with the putting in of the shemen, and there you're putting it into a mincha chayiv. So mehechates it to build a big chiddush that even if you did it one after the other, it's possible. It is a chiv lav. Maybe it's speaking where you did it together. And for Taisus, that's not a good shot in the pasuk because how it's almost impossible to coordinate that at the same nanosecond you're doing these two actions. Inami stam kra urche bozach. Normal pshat in a pasuk of how you would read it is we're talking about one after the other. First you put in shemen, then you put in levaina. Just like in a regular mincha that requires both shemen and levaina, you don't put them in simultaneously, you put them in sequentially. So pashtus, what the pasuk is outlining on the mincha schayte is the same thing that you do in a mincha that does require the shemen and levaina. So that was pshat number one. For Rabbi Tamafarish, slightly differently. Yochel b'shnei kohanim. What's the Gemara's question? You might think shnei kohanim. Kleimar b'shnei devarim. We don't even mean literally two kohanim. We just mean b'shnei devarim shezeh nosan shemen v'zeh nosan levaina. Even on the same mincha, but it's two different people. V'uadin ba'adam echad b'zeh chazeh. Elo mishum de'urcha de'milsa sheshnei kohanim b'gilam lasois. Two kohanim normally work on even one mincha. One puts in the shemen and one puts in the levaina. Why do we do that way? Mishum b'roiv am hadras melech v'masnisin koi. And the discussion here is directly referring to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says the chayiv ala shemen b'fnei atzmai v'ala levaina b'fnei atzmo. The Mishnah clearly says that there's two separate lavin. Uboy. So the Gemara is probing. Ichayiv b'zeh chazeh al shtein. Does the Mishnah actually mean to say that you'll be chayiv for both lavin, even though they're done sequentially? Even though the mincha is already possible because of the shemen by the time the kohen puts in the levaina. Midi the hava mechametz acha mechametz. Oi, maybe kibbutz and nifsala in chayiv. And that was exactly what the Gemara Shilas is the Torah being mechayiv, even though you put the levina on a mincha that has already been disqualified because of the oil. Umasnisen, maybe the Mishnah is not speaking about one mincha, rather the Mishnah is speaking about two different menachos, be achas nosan shemen, uva achas nosan levina. Talmud Leimar, the Torah teaches aleh begufa shel mincha, meaning on the same mincha, yotza noisen shemen al halavina, or levina al shemen, she'ein zeh begufa. This excludes putting the shemen on the levina or the levina on the shemen, she'ein zeh begufa, because you're not putting it right on the mincha, you're pouring it on the other product. Even if you're pouring the oil on an area of the mincha that there's no levana there, or vice versa, mashma she'en klal shemen bechol hamincha inami begufa mashma sheira v'loy psula. So now Rabbi Tam sort of has two ways to learn the Gemara. Does Allah tell you that you could only have one Isser, not both? You won't become us. It's not Usser anymore to put on the Levina once the Shem is on it. Or maybe the conclusion is exactly the opposite. So the Rabbi Tam learns the conclusion is that you will not be over by putting Levina on a mincha that's already possible because of the shemen that was put into it earlier. And the first drought seems to conclude that the Gemara's conclusion is that the Torah is saying you would be chayiv even though it's bezeh charzeh. But the focus of the Gemara is bezeh charzeh, where the mincha is possible already, which is a little bit easier to understand than Rashi's pshat that it's just talking about two separate kohanim. Why would we think so? Zok Tehillah Mishnah. Yosh to unois Hagasha. There are some menachos that require Hagasha. Yeah, true, you could.
You can fix it while you will be tired. Usually we can fix what.
You tell me since I could fix a lav, so since I could give back what I stole, I'm not over the sixel. But I am over the sixel. If I steal, I'm over the sixel. I can fix it, I can give it back. You're still over the sixel. Talk to Gemara, yesh to unois Hagasha. The Hagasha is before they take the kmitza, they take the whole container that holds the mincha and they approach the southwest corner of the mizbech. Now some minchas require Hagasha, they ain't to unois tenufa, but they don't need tenufa, which means they lift it up with the kohen. Then there are menachos Hagasha utenufa that need both, and then there are menachos that are tenufa v'loy Hagasha that only require tenufa, and then there are menachos that require loy tenufa v'loy Hagasha. Ve'elu tu'unos Hagasha, vein tu'unos tenufa. Let's start with the mainstream menachos that require Hagasha but not tenufa. Minchas hasoiles va'machvas u'marcheshes va'chalois v'rakikin. So these are the four primary menachos of the Dova, Soilis, Machvas, Marcheshes, and Mafei Tanner. And we learned yesterday that Mafei Tanner is split into two categories. It's considered two individual menachos, because one is if you decided to use Chalois, and one is if you decided to use Rakikin. And if you remember, in the earlier Gemara, Papa spoke out that according to Reb Shimon, there would have been another type of mincha, which would be Chalois and Rakikin, where you did half Chalois, half Rakikin. Minchas Kayanim, the mincha of the Kayanim requires Hagasha, not Nufa. Minchas Kayin Mashiach, Minchas Nachrim, Minchas Noshim, Minchas Chayte. All of the above require Hagasha, but not Tenufa. Reb Shimon Omer, Minchas Kayanim, Minchas Kayin Mashiach, Ein Behen Hagasha. They don't have Hagasha, so he takes them out of this last category. Why? Lefi she'ein b'hen kmitza. There's no kmitza done on the mincha of a kohen. It's the whole mincha is just put onto the mizbeach. And Shimon learns that kmitza and hagasha are linked. B'chol she'ein b'hen kmitza, ein b'hen hagasha. They're linked, and we're going to have to see why. Zok to Gemara weiter. Amar Rav Papa, the same comment he made on the earlier Mishnah, he makes on this Mishnah. Kalechet, it's not esertnan. It's always 10. So again, Rashi had two lashonis. Either it means esertnan, there's always 10 breads of the same type of bread, and therefore the two types of mafetaner are either chalosh or kikin, but not a blend. That's one pshat. The other pshat that we had is all of the times where it lists off these menachos, there's 10 menachos in the list and not 11 because mafetaner only counts as two, chalosh or kikin, but not the option to have both. You could even take some chalos and some matzos for a mafetaner, kamash shmalon olay. Kamash shmalon that a pub holds that our Tana does not hold like that. Minahanamili. How do we know this halacha of Hagasha? The Tani Rabbanan, Ilu Nemar. So now we're darshaning psukim again in detail. So let's look at the pasuk inside. It says as follows: Vehevesa esamincha asher yaseh me'ele lashem, which is talking about the minchas nedava. V'kriv el hakoyin v'higisha el hamizbeach. So the pasuk says very clearly you have to bring it to the mizbeach. V'vesa asher yaseh me'ele lashem v'kriv el hakoyin v'higisha. That is our pasuk. So Zog to Gemara, if it just said that, Hayisi Omer, Ein li shaton hagasha ela koimetz bilvat. What does it say over here? They take the mincha and they're makrivit. He's makrivit and he brings it to the mizbech. You're not makriv the whole mincha. You're only makriv the koimetz. So from this pasuk reading it, you would assume that the chiv to do hakasha is only on the koimetz. Mincha minayin. How do you know the entire mincha has to be brought to the mizbech even before the kmitza? Talmud loimer mincha. What does it say over here? The says hamincha. So the mincha, the entire mincha, not just the koimetz. Mincha schoite minayin. How do we know that a mincha schoite as well has to be brought to the mizbech, which doesn't have oil or levina? Talmud loimer es hamincha. Vevesa es hamincha is marba mincha schoite. Vidinu. And in fact, there's a svara to say that the mincha schoite requires hagasha, and we shouldn't need the extra limit of es hamincha. Why? Because nemer hacha mincha, it says over here minchas choite. The Rashi and the Rishonim changed the word from minchas chayva to minchas choite. If you look at top Rashi, minchas chayva choite, the high kra ba'agasha b'minchas nedavaksiv. So it says by minchas choite v'nemer hacha minchas nedava. So one pasuk talks about the minchas chayva and one pasuk talks about the minchas nedava. Ma minchas nedava to una hagasha, just like the minchas nedava requires hagasha, as we just saw in the pasuk. Af minchas chayva to una hagasha, so too the minchas chayva should require hagasha. So we could just do it with a memetzin, with a binyan. If the Torah is megala by a regular mincha that you need hagasha, we would equally apply it to the minchas choite as well. And therefore we have a pasuk. Why would we need a pasuk to tell us as a mincha that even the minchas choite needs hagasha? We could have learned it with logic. The teretz is we wouldn't, because I would ask Hagasha and I would say mal minchas nadava shekein tuna shem levayna. You see the minchas soilas, the minchas nadava is maybe at a higher level. It requires shem levayna, so maybe that's why it requires hagasha. But a minchas choite, it shouldn't. Zok to Gemara, that wouldn't be a good upslug, because a minchas soite techiach. I could prove to you from a minchas soite, because a minchas choite, the pasuk says it needs hagasha. Yet, let's see what Rashi says. B'minchas soite ksiv v'heiniv es hamincha minchas choite u'minchas nedava ein tu'unin tenufa k'dekatani b'masnisin. So soite dechiach. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. It does not require shemen and levina. Yet to una hagasha kidarmina lekamon ve'ekriva l'rabbis mincha soita lagasha. The Gemara is going to tell us soon that from the word ve'ekriva we learn that even a mincha soita needs hagasha, yet it doesn't have shemen or levina. So don't tell me that the mincha soita would not have hagasha because it doesn't need shemen and levina, because soita also doesn't have shemen and levina, and the mincha soita you do need hagasha on. So if anything, I could learn a memmit to do from mincha soita. Mamitzinu by mincha soita that it doesn't need shemen, it doesn't need levina, yet it still needs hagasha. Hu adin, we should say the same thing applies to mincha soita. So why do I need a pasuk? So the Gemara, because mal mincha soita shekain to una tnufa. A mincha soita needs tnufa, but the minchas chayte does not. So maybe that's why you wouldn't know that a minchas chayte needs a gasha. Zakt Gemara minchas nedava techiach, which also does not require tnufa, yet it still has a din of a gasha. The chazar adin loy roy zeh karoy zeh. The minchas nedava is not like the minchas chayte because it has shemen and levina. I'm sorry, it's not like a minchas soita because it has shemen and levina, and the minchas soita doesn't. Loy roy zeh karoy zeh. But the minchas soita is different from the minchas nedava because the minchas soita needs tnufa and the minchas nedava doesn't. Hasana shavu shabehen. What is the similarity between the minchas soita and the minchas nedava? Sheshavu lekmitza. They both require kmitza. Veshavu lehagasha, and they both require hagasha. Af ani avi minchas chayte. So in svara, I should automatically include minchas chayte in the chiv of hagasha. Sheshav alahen lekmitza. It does have the same halacha as the minchas soita, minchas nedava, because kmitza is required, and therefore tish v'lahen lagasha. So then my question is, why do I need a pasuk to be marba minchas chayte? Why can't they learn it from the combination of minchas soita and minchas nedava? And that the Gemara says, "Mal atzad hashav shemehen shein huchshiru lavai ba'ashir kivani." Tamer b'minchas chayte shall huchshiru lavai ba'ashir kivani. The minchas nedava, anybody could bring a minchas nedava from the richest man to the poorest man. You could be noidev a mincha. The same thing with a minchas soita. It doesn't matter if she's a rich woman or a poor woman, or if her husband's rich or poor. The minchas soita is defined how it's brought. But the minchas chayte is the dalas carbon of oil of a yared. Not anybody can bring the minchas chayte. Only someone who's very, very poor. So therefore, Zok to Gemara, you know why minchas soita and minchas nedava require hagasha is because anybody could bring it, but the minchas chayte is not brought by anybody. It's only limited to a select segment of society. Therefore, maybe you wouldn't need hagasha either. Talmud Leimer es mincha. So now we ruled out any other way to teach us that the minchas chayte requires hagasha. So therefore, we need the limud from the pasuk of es mincha. From Shimon Omer, Reb Shimon, as I don't believe Reb Shimon's arguing, he's just adding. It says ve'vesa. It says in the pasuk, it's the same pasuk we're talking about. Ve'vesa mincha sheyasa me'ela ve'kriva l'chayin. So the first word at the beginning, ve'vesa, is l'rabbis mincha sa'omer lagasha. It tells us that a mincha sa'omer that we bring on Pesach also needs a gasha. Why do we use the word vehevesa of all words to include the minchas omer? Because in reference to the minchas omer, the Torah says vavesam is omer reishis ketzichem alakain. So you see, the Torah refers to the minchas omer using the word vavesa. Then it says vekriva on this pasuk, right? It says vavesa hamincha sheyasa meidal l'shem vekriva alakain. What do we learn from vekriva? L'rabbis minchas soita l'hakasha. We said earlier that there's an assumption that the mincha soita requires hagasha. How do we know that? We know it from v'kriva, because again the word v'kriva is associated with the soita, v'cheinu omer v'hikriv oisa el hamizbeach, which is what it says regarding the soita. Really, you might ask, why do I need a pasuk to tell us v'kriva, to tell us that the minchas soita gets hagasha? Why can't they learn it from a svara? V'dinu uma minchas chayte she'ein tuna tenufa tuna hagasha, because we learned it from esa mincha. Mincha Saita, Shetu'una Tenufa, Einoidin, Shetu'una Hagasha. So why did I need a pasuk of the Hikriv specifically to indicate that a Mincha Saita needs Hagasha once I already know that a Mincha Saita needs Hagasha, and the Mincha, so why can't I learn it out of a Mincha Saita? So the Gemara, because Mal Mincha Saita, Shekein Bo Chitin. The Mincha Saita is brought with wheat. It's a higher grade. But the Mincha Saita is brought out of barley, so therefore maybe it wouldn't need a gasha. That's why I need a pasuk for the Mincha Saita. But for Gemara, the fact that it's using barley is not a reason why it shouldn't require a gasha. Why? Because in Mincha Sa'imer Techiach, we know that the Mincha Sa'imer is brought with sa'irin, and we just said from Vevesam, it includes the Mincha Sa'imer has to have a gasha. So Gemara, true, but Mal Mincha Sa'imer shekein tuna shemenu levaina. The Minchas Omer requires Shemin and Levaina. Maybe that's the reason why it needs Hagasha. But a Minchas Saita does not. Because the Minchas Saita does not either need Shemin and Levaina. The Chazer Adin, Loi Rozeh Karayuzeh. The Minchas Saita is not like the Minchas Omer because it doesn't need Tenufa. But Loi Rozeh Karayuzeh, and it doesn't need Shemin and Levaina. But Loi Rozeh Karayuzeh, and the Minchas Omer is not like the Minchas Nadava because the Minchas Omer requires Shemin and Levaina, and the Minchas Chayte is made out of Chitin. So therefore, there's two different svaras here. But Atzara Shav Shabehen, what the Minchas Chayte has in common with the Minchas Omer is Sheshavu L'Kmitza. They both require a Kmitza, and therefore Vishavi L'Agasha. So therefore, from a Memetzinu, from the Minchas Omer to the Minchas Chayte, I should also know Minchas Saita. Afan Ne'avi Minchas Saita, Sheshav Shalahen L'Kmitza, therefore Tiv Shalahen L'Agasha. So why do I need the pasuk of the Kriva to teach me that a Minchas Saita needs Hagasha? I can learn it at Mitzvara from a Memetzinu between Minchas Omer and Minchas Chayte. So Gemara, because Mala Tzara Shavishaben, side the Minchas Omer and side the Minchas Chayte share a feature. Shekein Lo Huchsharu Lavoi Kemach. They cannot be out of low grade flour. There's Kemach and then there's Silas. Kemach is a lower grade flour, and Silas is a very finely ground flour. So Mala Tzara Shavishaben, side the Minchas Chayte and side the Minchas Omer have to be Silas. Taimer Mincha Saita Shehuchshu Lovai Kemach. The Mincha Saita can be brought out of a lower grade, a less fine flour. Maybe it shouldn't need a gasha. Talmud Leimer V'Kriva. That's why the pasuk needed to say the word V'Kriva to be a signal that it's also referring to the Mincha Saita, which also uses the word V'Kriv. Rabbi Yehuda says V'Havesa. We don't learn it out of the kriva. We learn it out of the hevesa. Now, the hevesa is what the Shimon told us earlier is the makar for the minchas omer to require Hagasha. Rabbi Yehuda is applying the pasuk of hevesa to the minchas soita. The chenu by the soita the heaviest karbana. Avol minchas omer now. Rabbi Yehuda is now using Vavesa, so we no longer have a pasuk of Vavesa to teach us that the Minchas Omer needs Hagasha. The teretz is Rabbi Yehuda holds I don't need a pasuk for Minchas Omer. Rabbi Yehuda Letzrichakra, he holds of Minchas Omer Letzrichakra. My timer, Medina Kasya, I could learn it from the Kal V'Chaimer. Uma Minchas Chayte, she'ena Tuna Tenufa, Tuna Hagasha. Ma'adach the Minchas Chayte, which does not need Tenufa, needs Hagasha. Minchas Omer, she'tuna Tenufa. You might say, Mala Minchas Chayte, Shekein Bo Chitin, and the Minchas Omer is Sa'irin, so maybe it shouldn't need Hagasha. For that I would say, Minchas Saita Teichiach. From Saita I could learn, because the Saita is also brought with Sa'irin, and it requires Hagasha. I Mala Minchas Chayte, Shekein Bo Levar Avain, the Maskeres Avaini. Maybe the Saita's mincha needs Hagasha because it has extra functions. It's revealing to us whether or not this woman was a chayte or not. Zakt Gemara minchas chayte dechiach. Minchas Chayta does not have this special quality of revealing what happened, and it still needs Hagasha. The Minchas Soita is not like the Minchas Chayte because it's Lavar Avoin, V'loy Roizeh, Karayuzeh, and the Mincha of Chayte is different because it's brought chitin. Hatzara shava shaben shekin shava l'kemitza. Sai the minchas ha'omer, sai the minchas chayta require kemitza, and v'shavu l'hagasha, and they both did hagasha. Afani avi minchas ha'omer sheshav shalen l'kemitza tif shalen l'hagasha. Oh, thank you so much. So too, I would also say that the minchas ha'omer, which shares the quality of Kamitza, should also require Hagasha. So therefore, Zok Rabbi Yehuda, I don't need a pasuk of a Avesa to include a Minchas Omer. So the problem is Reb Shimon did need the Havesa for Minchas Omer. So he obviously must have had a pircha on this Ma'atzad that Rabbi Yehuda just successfully executed. Thank you very much. So the question is, what did Reb Shimon see a fault in this Mahatzad from Minchas Chayte and Minchas Soita to learn from their Minchas Ha'omer? Zok the Gemara, Umay Parchas, Reb Shimon Parchachi. This is Reb Shimon's pircha to this limud. Mal Asad Hashav Shaben, Minchas Soita and Minchas Chayte, Shekain Mitzuyin. They could happen anytime. Their occurrences are not limited because people do, anytime someone does an Aveira, it's going to happen. Anytime someone's a Saita, it's going to happen. But the Minchas Omer can only happen, it's limited to scheduled periods of once a year. Rabbi Yehuda said, Adarabba, Adarabba, Ha Mitzuyitzvei. It's, why would you say that the Minchas Chayte and the Minchas Soita are more Mitzuya because they're not limited to a schedule? Pum verkehrt. At least I know guaranteed that the Minchas Omer will be brought once a year. But what's the likelihood that Saita may not happen once in 10 years? Or a Minchas Omer can happen once in 10 years. It's not a scheduled item. So verkehrt. Ha mitzuyitfei. The Minchas Omer is much more regular. Hanach zimnin d'lo mishkach alaklal. It's possible that we would never need a Minchas Saita or a Minchas Chayta. Oi. So therefore, Zok Rabbi Yehuda, I don't need a pasuk. Every year there's a mitzvah to bring a Minchas Omer. But it's a lot less common that the Minchas Omer wouldn't be brought. Or normally it's brought. Unless something like a crisis and the Strait of Hormuz is closed and they can't get wheat. But besides that, normally it would be brought. Or maybe the whole purpose of Vevesa, maybe it's not, it doesn't teach you, maybe Vevesa can't teach you anything. Not Minchas Omer and not Minchas Soita. Ella, maybe what Vevesa is teaching you is Ella Sheyachid Misnadev Umevi Mincha Cheres Chutz Me'ela. Maybe when the pasuk says Vevesa says HaMincha, maybe the pasuk is talking about a completely different issue, and that is you think that Minchas Nadav is limited to the Menachos in the Torah as listed. Soilas, Machvas, Marcheshes, and Mafei Tanur. Vavesa tells you, no, you have a much more broader area that you could bring a mincha from. You could bring other types of minchas. So, Vavesa, El Shayachid, Misnadev, Umevi, Mincha Cheres, Chutz, Me'ela, Shebe'inyan. Maybe the pasuk is telling us, Vavesa, you could bring any type of mincha. Okay, Zok to Gemara, Rashi says, "She'en ksuvim b'parsha kol shalchayte." So, for instance, let's say someone wants to bring a standalone minchas chayte. Could he do that? Maybe Vevesa says you could. V'dinu tzibur maybe mincha minachitin chayva. The tzibur has sometimes a chiyuv to bring a mincha from chitin. Where do we have it? It's by the shtei alachem upon him, and umevi min hasayin chayva. And the tzibur also sometimes brings a mincha from sarim chayva, which be the omer. Therefore, af yochid shemevi mincha menachitin in the dava, so to a yochid that could bring a minchas chitin from the dava, yavi mincha menasar in the dava. Maybe he could also bring a mincha of sa'ir mas in the dava, because we know all of the menachos that are listed as a minchas of silas, of flour, of wheat. Maybe he should be able to bring from sa'ir as well, nedava. Talmud loymar eile. It says in the pasuk ve'vesa es hamincha ashayasa me eila. Ainli ella eila. The only type of menachos that a Yisrael can bring are those listed under the category of minchas nadav. Oy einoi oimer ela. Maybe that's not what Ela teaches us. Maybe Ela is teaching us Ela lo oimer harei olai mincha shemevi chamishason. Maybe when it says Ela, it's telling you that if you say harei olai minchas marcheshes, you bring a marcheshes. If you say harei olai minchas soiles, you mean a minchas soiles. But if I say harei olai mincha without specifying what type, maybe it means I have to bring 5 menachos. Maybe it means I have to bring a minchas soilis, a minchas machvas, a minchas marcheshes, a minchas mavetaner of rakikin, and a minchas mavetaner of chalois. Maybe that's what it's telling us. Talmud loimer may ela, which is a miyat. You don't have to bring all 5. Zok to Gemara. Shar menachos, other menachos, kegoyin minchas nochrim, minchas noshim, Hagasha. Let me see the Dalit. It doesn't read well. All right, it takes it out. That's right. Shar menachos, and it skips this. Yochol shanimar ba'af shtei alechem v'lechem apanim. Maybe it's also being marba. Maybe we're also being marba that shtei alechem and lechem apanim also need Hagasha. Talmud loimer me'ela. Me'ela tells us that only these need Hagasha, not the lechem apanim and the shtei alechem. Gewaltig. Zog to Gemara, marbani ashar menachos sheyesh mehen leishim. I include all menachos where some of it is put on the mizbeach, like the minchas soita, like the minchas choite, and like the minchas oimer, umoitzani. But what's excluded from the chiv of Hagasha? Shtei alechem v'lechem aponim she'ein mehen leishim. No part of the lechem aponim and no part of the shtei alechem are put on the mizbeach. Frag the Gemara, v'alei minchas nesachim kula leishim. The minchas nesachim, which accompanies a carbon, is completely put on the mizbeach. So if that's what you're using as criteria, if it's yesh men leishim, maybe the minchas nesachim as well. Yachal yetuna hagasha. Talmud loimer ve'kriva. That's why he uses the word ve'kriva to tell you that it doesn't include the minchas nesachim. Frag Gemara, but v'hafikte. You already used the word ve'kriva to teach us about the minchas choite or about the minchas soita. Zok to Gemara, v'hikriv ve'kriva. It could have said v'hikriv. It says ve'kriva. From that extra miyot, we're also excluding the minchas nesachim. Zok to Gemara, my rois l'rabbi shar menachos l'hoitzi minchas nesachim. You're including all menachos, but you're excluding minchas nesachim. Why is that? Zok to Gemara, marbe ani shar menachos shebois biglal atzmon. I'm including the other menachos because they're brought as standalone karbanis. Umoitzani minchas nesachim, but I exclude minchas nesachim. Shein ba b'chlal atzma. It's not brought as an independent carbon. Rather, it's brought as an accessory to the main carbon. Ay v'alei minchas kaihanim uminchas koyin mishiach bois b'glal atzmon. They are brought independently. So therefore, Yochol Yehu Tunus Hagasha. You might think they need Hagasha, and Reb Shimon said that they don't. Talmud loimer ve'gisha. And ve'gisha tells us that they won't need it. In fact, Gemara Brahimi Boilu Lugufasha Tuna Hagasha. We need ve'gisha to tell us the main halacha that Evi Mincha needs Hagasha. So how could you learn from ve'gisha to be b'mayit minchas kayanim and minchas koyin Mashiach? So Gemara. min vehigish vegisha. Again, it's the extra hay at the end that we're using to be b'mayit the minchas kohanim. Why are you including these other menachos like the soite and the choite? But ulahoitzi minchas kohanim or minchas koy Mashiach. Why are you excluding minchas kohanim and minchas koy Mashiach from the chil of Hagasha? Zaktumar marba nishar menachos sheyesh mehen leishim. Marba all the other menachos where there's a part of it that's put on the mizbeach, part of it that's not. And uvois b'glalatzman, and they have a second feature that they're brought as a standalone independent mincha, and v'yesh mehen l'kayanim, and they also have a chelik that go to the kayanim. Umoitzani shtei alechem v'lechem aponim. Shtei alechem and lechem aponim are excluded from the mitzvah of Hagasha because they don't have she'ein mehen l'ishim. No part of them are put on the mizbeach. Uminchas nesachim I exclude she'ein neba b'glalatzma. And the minchas kohanim and minchas koy Mashiach, Rabbi Shimon excludes because she'ein mehen l'kohanim, because there's no share, there's no portion of these menachas that go to the kohen. V'heirim. Now we're up to a whole new halacha. V'heirim. You have v'heirim imenu b'kumtzai. How is the kmitza done? Yochel b'kli. I would have thought I use a keli to gather the kmitza. The kohen doesn't do it by hand. Talmud Leimer v'heirim imenu b'kumtzai. Ma Rama ha'amar la'adon b'kumtzai. Just like the Rama mentioned by this mincha is with his hand, with his kaimates. Av harama amar kan b'kumtzai. So all places where there's a harama required by a mincha, it's done with his hand and it's not done with a keli. Okay, we'll stop here and we'll be tomorrow.